Hey guys, this is EdRoh. Today we're going to be building this Web3 decentralized social media application. You're going to be able to connect to your blockchain account through MetaMask on the website by clicking and doing this. And you're going to be able to add users as friends on Lens protocol. And you can confirm the transaction on the blockchain. The whole purpose of building a decentralized social media application is so that you can have your account not privately owned, but rather saved in part of the public blockchain away from private ownership. So to build this, we're going to be using React for the front end and Lens protocol for calling the blockchain. Even if you are a beginner, this video is for you as we will be creating this entirely from scratch. We're going to be using React, Ethers, GraphQL, Lens, and Chakra UI to help make our lives easier when building this application. All right, so now let's start coding by opening up a new directory in VS Code. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to install create React app. So we're going to write npx create React app decentralized social. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a boilerplate template so that we can use React with very little setup. After that's installed, we are going to go into our folder, decentralized social, and we are going to open that up. Now you're going to have a plugin to install code, or if you want to open that folder, or you can just open it like so. So I'm just going to open it up. And from here, what we're going to do is we're going to install a few more packages. So we're going to do npm i, urql, graphql, and ethers. So urql and graphql allow us to call the Lens protocol, while ethers allows us to make API calls to the blockchain. Installing one more package, which is on the Chakra UI website. So we're going to go to the Getting Started page, and we're going to go down and find npm i Chakra UI React. We're going to copy this line. We're going to insert it into the terminal and have it installed. The purpose of Chakra is so that we have pre-made components that allow us to build our React app very quickly. Here we're going to close our terminal. We're going to open up source, and we're going to clean up some of these files. So we're going to be deleting setup tests, report web vitals, logo.svg, app.css, and app.test.js. I'm going to be deleting all of those. Then we're going to go to index.js. We're going to be removing this information right here, like so. Save that. We're going to moving everything in the header. We're going to replacing this with the lowercase a to be consistent, and we're going to remove our import logo, like so. There, we're going to open up index.js, and we're going to import Chakra provider. And we're going to wrap our app component with that. This is so that Chakra can do its thing and provide the styles it needs. All right, and then from there, we're going to go to our index.css, and we're going to delete everything here. From here, we're going to have to import some Google fonts. So we're going to go to the Google API for fonts website, and we're going to go and find a font called DM Serif Display. So this will be the header fonts. So we're going to go over here, we're going to add it, and we're going to hit import. And we're going to copy the information between the style tags, and we're going to copy and paste over here. So that's for the header. We want one more font, and it's going to be called Quattrocento Sans. And so we're going to find regular 400 as well. We're going to click here, we're going to hit import, and we're going to copy this as well. On the next line and save. And off screen, I added this gradient background PNG file right here. So this is for the background of the website. But you can go down. There's a link I have posted in the description. You can find the gradient background and download that as well. And after that, we're going to do what people call a CSS reset, because we want to reset some of the defaults of the browsers. So we're going to do HTML and then body, and we're going to set padding of 0, margin of 0, font family of Quattrocento Sans, and we're going to set that as sans serif. We're also going to add image tag because we're going to use image tags later on. And we're going to set this max width of none. And we're going to set that as important because we have some issues later on. And we're going to set the border radius to 50%. And finally, we're going to set the app CSS class name that we took. And we're going to give it a background with a URL of an image we haven't added yet, but we're going to call this gradient background.png. And we're going to set this as no repeat, center, center, fixed. And we're also going to add a background size of cover. And we're going to set this for different browsers. Background size cover. So we're going to copy this. So this allows us to have the background size for different browsers. So this one is going to be Moz. This one's going to be O. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to be calling the Lens API endpoints. And Lens uses GraphQL. So what we need to do for GraphQL is we need to make queries to call this protocol endpoint. So when we want to call, for example, profiles on the Lens API, we need to make a query for that using something that allows us to call the GraphQL, such as URQL is what we're going to be using. And we need the actual query, which is what we're going to get from the Lens documentation. So before we go into that, we're just going to create a file. We're going to call it queries.js. And we're going to import something called create client from URQL. And we're going to get an API URL. And we're going to call this https://api.lens.dev. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a lot of the information from the Lens documentation, which is right here. And this has all the queries and information that you'll probably need to make API calls. And we're also going to add something called Lens Hub Contract Address. And this contract address is what we're going to do. We're going to grab them from deployed contract addresses over here on the Lens documentation. So if you take a look, deployed contract addresses, the first one is what we're going to need under Lens Hub Proxy. So we're going to pass that in and pass that as our contract address. And then we're going to establish our URL client. This is for URQL to create a client and establish a connection. So we're going to pass in a URL and API URL as the value. And from here, we're going to export a const called query recommended profiles. So this is where this will allow us to make a query and grab the recommended profiles that Lens provides. So if you go to their documentation, you can go down into Lens API. You can go down to profiles and see the recommended profiles section. And in this section, we have API details. Now, if you take a look, Lens is good enough to provide the query for the specific information that's for recommended profiles. So if you just copy this, this will give you all the query information you need to call this endpoint. And from here, we're going to create one more query. We're going to call this query explore publications. And we're going to go to the Lens documentation again. We're going to go down to the section called explore. We're going to see explore publications. Go down and see the query over here. We're going to copy that and we're going to paste it. So this will allow us to grab the publications from the Lens API. And now that we have our queries, there's one more thing we need to add, and we're going to add the ABI of the Lens Hub implementation contract. So we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it Lens Hub JSON. And now this file is going to include information that comes from a deployed contract address that's on the Lens website. So if you go here, Lens Hub implementation, we're going to open that up. We're going to go to contract on this Polygon scan website. And we're going to go down, all the way down until we reach something called contract ABI. So now we're going to click this copy button over here, which allows us to copy this, and we're going to paste it all in here. And if we save it, it's going to auto format it if you have Prettier. The purpose of this, use that information and be able to call the functions on the contract. And with that, we can now go to our app.js and we're going to start coding out our UI. So we can actually remove import app CSS because we're not using that. And we're going to import use effect and use state from React. So these are the main hooks of React that allows us to both keep our state or any data that changes on our UI, and use effect allows us to call different functions at different points in the timing of when these components get loaded or initialized. And then from here, we're going to import all the stuff that we exported from the queries.js file. So we're going to import URL client, lens hub contract address, query recommended profiles, query explore publications. And we're going to get it all from the queries file. And we're going to import lens hub from lens hub JSON. Let me rewrite that. Lens hub. And import ethers from ethers. And import a few items from Chakra UI, which is box, button, image from at Chakra UI React. So with all those imports, we're going to start with grabbing or creating our state. Basically, the state is the information that's going to change throughout the time period of this website. So we're going to have a state called account, and set account will be the function that changes it. And we're going to use state. We're going to start with a null. So this will represent the account. If the user is not logged in, it's going to be null. If the user is logged in, the account address will be stored here. And then we're going to do the same thing with profiles and set profile. So basically, when we call the lens, we want to grab the profiles and the information that lens can provide us. But before that, our state of this will be an empty array because we haven't called it yet. And then we're going to also have posts. Same thing, and use state will be an empty array. So post will represent the actual Twitter feed, or the post basically, or the feed that's like Twitter, but basically from Lens. It's going to grab it, and we're going to set that information here. From here, now we need to create the functions that will provide us the functionality for the website. So things like signing in, getting the recommended profiles, getting the posts, following user accounts. Things like that is what we're going to be creating. So the first thing we're going to create is the sign in function. So we're going to pass an async function called sign in. And so what the async function is so that we can wait for asynchronous calls. So basically, anytime that requires you're calling something outside of the client or like the front end facing website. So if you call the blockchain, you need to make an asynchronous call. So we're going to call a variable called const accounts, and we're going to await, meaning we're going to wait for this to happen first. And we're going to call something called window Ethereum dot request. And we're going to pass in a method of ETH request accounts. So this will allow us to have MetaMask call the blockchain, make sure you're able to sign in on this website. We're going to call setAccount as well, and we're going to pass in account 0. So basically, we're going to pass in the first value that comes in. So accounts can be multiple values, but at the current moment, from my understanding, there's only one value. So we're going to pass in setAccount. So once we sign in, we're going to pass it into the account variable. The next function is we're going to create an async function called getRecommendedProfiles. And this one is we are going to use our URL client that we've created. So we're going to create response equals await URL client. And we're going to do .query. And we're going to query our recommended profiles that we have created. And we're going to set this to promise so that this is asynchronous. And just by doing this, this will allow us to grab the recommended profiles in a very simple, easy way because Lens provides the recommended profiles for us. And now all we have to do is grab the profiles that are in there and response.data.recommended profiles.slice 0 to 5. Let me explain what's going on. I've already checked what the response object looks like. So basically, normally you would console log what this response looks like, and then you would try to retrieve the proper information that you need. So in this case, the nested object includes a response, and then the data, and then .recommended profiles. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take the first 5 in this case. So we only want the first 5 recommended profiles for this user. So we're going to set those profiles, and we're going to have and pass those in. And the last function, or actually 2 more functions that we need, is one is going to be getting the posts now. So the previous one was to get the recommended profiles that the user should follow. And this will be the actual post that's like kind of similar to what you would see in a Twitter feed. So we're going to do the same thing as we did before. We're going to await URL client .query query explore publications to promise, just like we did before, except we're doing explore publications instead. I'm going to format that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable const posts equals response, and this time it's going to be very similar structure, except this one's going to be explore publications dot items. And what we're going to do is we're going to be filtering this because we want to filter all their posts that are coming in. We only want to grab the posts that have a profile attached to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to say post.profile. If that exists, we're going to return the post. Otherwise, we're just going to return an empty string. This is just a safe check. Okay? And then from there, we're going to set posts, and we're going to pass the post that we just set up. We're almost there. So we're going to create one more function, and we're just going to call this follow. So this is after you sign in, we want to be able to follow the user. So in this case, it's a little different. We're going to have to actually call the contract address. So we're going to create something called a provider equals new ethers providers dot web3 provider window.ethereum. So in this case, what we're doing is we're grabbing ethers and we're calling the Web3 provider that ethers provides so that we can call the blockchain. The reason why this is different from right here, get post, get recommended profiles, is that these are just grabbing the information from the blockchain. However, when we follow, we need to be signing the transaction. That is why we have to do these extra steps, because this is something that could cost gas. And in this case, it does. Ethers.contract. Let me spell that correctly. And we're going to pass in lens hub contract address. We're going to pass in lens hub. And just a tip, when you're doing this and you have the variables that are provided, make sure you use the IntelliSense because it helps you avoid bugs. This is a little small tip. And we're going to pass in get signer. Just one more note. So this is what allows us to sign the transaction so we can follow the user. But if you have a setup properly, which I might do in a future video where we do a more complete decentralized social media application, in that scenario, you can have a token, and that token will allow you to follow and do all these following and transactions and doing different social media kind of things, all for free once you've signed in. But we're not going to cover that for now. We're going to do the very bare minimum. So the bare minimum requires you to have some Polygon to follow people. So here we're going to parse int, and we're going to pass in ID. So what we're doing is contract.follow. We're passing in ID of the user that we want to follow, and we want to make sure it's a number. And here, we're just going to pass in some random piece of data because that's needed. And we're going to make sure we await this transaction to finish, like so. And finally, so all of this allows us to create the functions, but we're not calling these functions. These are just creating the functions that do the functionality, but we have not created anything that calls them. So we're going to actually use useEffect so that when the app loads or when this website loads, we're going to call two of these functions. And those two functions are going to be get recommended profiles, because we want that to happen immediately when the website loads. And then we're going to call get posts as well. And we're going to pass in an empty array as the second parameter of useEffect. So again, this is going to happen on the first load of this website. These two, sign in and follow, are going to be in the actions or when you click certain buttons. So that's why those two are not here. That we have everything in place to start coding out the UI and the layouts and the elements. Let's take a look at the final product. So the final product is going to involve a navbar. We're going to have a posts section, and then we're going to have a recommended friends section. So we're going to start with the navbar. So right here, I'm going to pass in the box component, which is from Chakra UI. And this is basically a div element, but we can pass in CSS properties as part of the element. So I can pass in width of 100%, for example, and we're going to pass in a background color, and we're going to pass in RGBA 5, 32, 64, 28. If you're wondering how I got these values, I just kind of experimented beforehand before I created this video, so I know those values. So just FYI, with Chakra, you can pass in any CSS properties into any of their components. Now, there are a lot of options like Tailwind, CSS, there's Material UI, a lot of different elements. But this, by being able to pass in CSS properties for Chakra UI, is it makes it very efficient to write the code. And it's very nice because your CSS is visually tied to where your components are located. Whereas style components, generally you have the components written here. In this case, Chakra UI, you have the CSS attached to the components at this location. It's very nice, it's very convenient. I would say it is probably the best method I have found in terms of writing CSS. The only downside is it does get long. Your components do get long, so you have to split out your components much more if you want something organized. But to me, the convenience outweighs the inconvenience of the code being very long sometimes. So the next part is we're going to add a box as well, and we're going to pass in a number of CSS properties here. So we're going to start with the display of flex. And we're going to pass in justify content, and we're going to pass in space between. So what this is doing is we're going to be creating this as a flex element. So these two are split with space between. That's what this flex is doing. and we're going to add in align items to be center. So that means it's vertically aligned. We're going to have a width of 55%, so it doesn't take up the full width. We're going to have a margin of auto, and we're going to set a color of white. Set that to be white, and we're going to have a padding of 10 pixels on the top and 0. So I always use shorthands. So this, if you only have two values, this represents up and down, left and right. So 10 pixels for up and down, 0 pixels for left and right. And then we're going to have another box right here because we need another box for this section. So we're going to pass in another box, and this one's going to be Decentra. So that's going to be our logo text. And we're going to set this font family to be DM serif display because that's the header font. We're going to set the font size of 44 pixels, and we're going to make this italic like so. And then we're going to have another box, decentralized social media app. So this box represents this section right here, decentralized social media app. So they're on top of each other. And now we're going to create the connect. So connect has two situations. One is when you connect, before you connect, let's say I go here. Let's assume I disconnected this account. Now it's going to have this state. But if you connect it, now you're going to have a connected state. So we're going to have a conditional where if account exists, we're going to have a situation of having a box with a background color of white and then a padding of 15 pixels, a border radius of 6 pixels. Close that, and we're going to say this is connected. So essentially when it's connected, we're going to have this styling. Otherwise, if it's not connected, we're going to have a button component that we got from Chakra UI, and we're going to pass in onClick the sign in function. So this represents the sign in that we've created before. So anytime they click this button, we're going to be asked by MetaMask to sign in. So if we go back down, we're going to go and we're going to create a color of RGBA 53264. And we're going to pass in a hover CSS background. So this is equivalent to saying it's a pseudo element selector or CSS selector. Whenever this button gets hovered, we can add in the styles over here. We can say a background color of number 080808. Is that correct? Oh, one more. Oh, wait. Let's get 808080 is what you're looking for. And then from here, we're going to add the connect value. Now I'm going to use Prettier and ESLint to auto format this. Now with this in place, we can actually check and start running our application. And we're going to run our application in our terminal. And we're going to write npm run start. The shortcut, if you're using VS Code, is Control' to open up your terminal. And so we're going to open it up, and we're going to open up localhost 3000. And we're going to wait for that to happen. And as you can see, we have our Navbar. Perfect. And let's see if we can connect. That seems like we're already connected. So let's disconnect. Disconnect. Let's try it again. Yeah, there we go. So now you can connect like so. The reason why you saw the weird situation is because I have my completed application on a different port, and that's why I was connected there. But now I'm connected to our site. And before we get to the next section, what we're going to do is actually we're going to console log the profiles and the posts that we receive from the Lens protocol. By the way, I use a shortcut to get the console log by highlighting and pressing a keyboard shortcut. And you can use Turbo Console Log VS Code extension for that, which is you just write Control Option L and then you would get a console log statement right below. It's very nice. So once we have that saved, we're going to go back and we're going to refresh the page and we're going to see that we received the profiles and the posts. And as you can see, they give you a lot of information, including the posts as well. So for the post, mostly we're just going to be mainly using the metadata. For the profiles, we're going to be using most of the information as well as the picture. And after we have that, we're going to go back to our completed application and we're going to see that we are going to start building these posts and the friend suggestion. So as you can see, what we're going to do is we're going to use Flexbox and we're going to split this into two sections. So this would probably take around 65% This will take the other 45%. So if we go back to our code, we are going to start off by creating a section. We're going to call it content. And we are going to create a box, which is basically a div, like I mentioned before. We're going to create another box. This part will represent the posts. And another box. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. Another box. And this section will include friend suggestions. And so we're going to start by making this flex display equals flex. I'm going to do justify content, and we're going to do space between, which will space the two divs far from each other. And we're going to set this width as 55% because it's the same as what we are doing with the navbar. And we're going to set a margin, and we're going to use a shorthand notation to cover all of it. So 35 pixels on the top, auto, auto, auto. And color is going to be white. Now we're going to work on our posts. We're going to ignore friend suggestions for now. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it a width of 65%, a max width of 65%, as well as a min width to keep our width consistent. And we're going to add, here is where we're going to start writing our posts. Since we have the post value, you can look up here, posts. What we want is the image. So if you take a look, the profile, we want the image of the user. So we're going to look at post.profile, picture, and then we're going to go to original, and we're going to grab the URL. So this gives us the profile image is what we're going to try to do. And so we're going to write posts.map so we can map through or cycle through each of the posts that has been given back to us. And we're going to create a box in here. And in this box, we're going to do some styling. Margin bottom equals 25 pixels. We're going to give it a key of post ID. So React can have a proper ID. So React needs a specific ID for each one. And then we're going to give it a background color. And we're going to do RGB A 5, 32, 64, 28. So it was similar to the color that we had before. And then padding is equal to 40 pixels on top, 30 pixels on right, 40 pixels on bottom, and 25 pixel. Again, I'm using the shorthand, which is very convenient. So top, right, bottom, left. And we're going to add a border radius of 6 pixel. And then finally, we're going to create another div. I know there's a lot of divs, but this gets us the layout as we need. So we're going to have a box. This is going to be a flex. Display equals flex. And here, inside, we're going to have 2 sections. If you take a look at the completed app, we have the profile and the content. So these, again, are split into 2 sections. So this is the right side. This is the left side. So we need flex to do and split up the sections properly. So we're going to have profile image section. And then we're also going to have a post content section. I'm going to add another box over there. All right. And so we're going to give it a width of 75 pixels, a height of 75 pixels, and a margin top of 8 pixels. And inside this, we're going to start with putting our image tag. We're going to give it alt equals profile. Given our IntelliSense isn't really working, we're going to have to manually write it. So we're going to have source, and we're going to pass in post.profile. And we're going to give it a ternary operator because post.profile may not exist on some of these posts. So if it does exist, we're going to do what we expect it to do. So post.profile.picture, optionally if it exists, and then original, optionally if that exists, then we're going to pass it in URL. So we need all these safe checks, including these question marks, which just means that picture exists, then we can go into the next param or property. And if it doesn't exist, we're going to pass in an image, and we're going to call this default avatar.png. Now I haven't added this yet, but you can get the default avatar PNG in the GitHub repo I have linked prior. So we're going to be using that as the backup image if they don't have one. And then again, we're going to copy this width 7 like that. So width 75, height 75 pixels. And we're going to give an on error. So basically, if we have some kind of error happening with our image, we need to call this particular function on error. And this will allow us to also, if the image doesn't exist while we're waiting, we want to give it this function. That's looping. So we need to boot on error equals null, and current target dot source is going to equal default avatar. So a lot of this code right here, including on error and the source, is so that anytime the URLs don't exist, we have a default avatar. This happens if we have an error with the API coming back. Check if it's working. So now if we go here, refresh it, we have some images, we have a default, and some broken images. So now if you look at this, we are getting some problems with this. And the problem that we're getting has to do with the fact that these are IPFS URLs, which is interplanetary file system. But basically it's a fancy way of how you store images or assets into the blockchain. So these type of URLs are problematic. So we need to append some values to the string of these particular URLs for them to work. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a function and we're going to pass that in to source. So we're going to call this parse image URL, and we're going to pass in post. And here we're going to have a few checks. So if post.profile exists, just like we kind of did before, we're going to grab the URL first, profile picture, question mark original, question mark .url, which is the same as before, but we're going to have an extra check, which is if URL exists and URL starts with IPFS, like so. We are going to then grab the hash of the IPFS. So we grab URL.split, like so, and we're going to grab the first value. So what we're grabbing here is going to be this value. We just need this part, not the first part. So we need that, and we are going to return a string starting with https://gateway.pinata.cloud/IPFS, and we're going to pass in the IPFS hash like so. So now if it's an IPFS URL, we're going to pass the hash with this appended in front of it. And then we're going to also return URL if this check doesn't go through. So this is the default behavior. And if post.profile never existed, we're just going to return default avatar PNG. And as you can see in the public folder, I have default avatar PNG. So make sure you add that. And then we're going to go back to our source and we're going to do parse image URL. And we're going to pass in the post. And now if you take a look, we refresh it. Gateway. Oh, I did make a mistake. I need a slash right here. So if you go back, you add a slash. Now we're going to have the images. Now this is a problem I'm not sure how to solve, but if you take a look, now we're getting 429, which means that we're calling the API too many times. I'm not exactly sure what the resolution for this is, but let me know in the comments if you're able to figure that out. All right. After we finish that, we're going to move on to the post content section. So we're going to do flex grow on this and give it 1 and margin left of 20 pixels. So we have space between the profile image and the content. And here we're going to have a box like so. And we're going to separate this display flex. We're going to separate the profile name and the follow icon. So we're going to do justify content equals space between, like so. And we're going to pass in a box slash box like that. And we're going to do font family equals DM serif display and font size of 24 pixel. We're going to pass in the post.profile and the handle. So that's the handle of the user that created the post. And then from here, we're going to create another box. Like that. I'm going to pass in height of 50 pixel. And we're going to give it a hover with a cursor of pointer. And then inside this box, we're going to pass in an image tag from Chakra UI, and we're going to pass in a few properties. So alt equals follow icon, source like this, follow icon dot png, and then we're going to copy the height of 50 pixel. We're going to do that, and we're going to do width as well. Oops, that is not width. And we're going to pass in an on click of the follow function that we created. And we're going to pass in the post ID. So this will allow us to be able to follow. And it seems like I may have missed something because the prettier is not working. So there might be a tag. Okay, so I messed up here. All right, so we have the post content. This is the image. Now we don't have the follow icon. I'll be adding that off screen real quick. Here I added the follow icon, so you can see that. And now we're going to add one more thing. So if I align this, this is the box that we were concerned with. And now we're going to put another box, overflow wrap. So we want overflow wrap so the content will wrap around if the post content is too large. That's why we're doing that. And we're going to give it a size of 14 pixels, like so. We're going to close the box, and we're going to pass in post.metadata content. And if all works, again, I've missed the closing tag. So if it all works, now we can see we have the content. This is the handle, this is the follow, and this is the content. Beautiful. Before we move on to the friend suggestions, I realized I did make a typo. If you go back up where it says connected, this should have a hashtag right there. And PC should be PX. So that should fix the connected button. Now, if we go down to the friend suggestions, we're going to continue working on this, and we're going to give this a width of 30%. Background color, same as before, which is RGBA, 5, 32, 64, 28. We're going to go padding equals 40 pixels, 25 pixels. So padding of 40 pixels top and bottom, 25 pixels left and right. Border radius of 6 pixels. And a height of fit content. Because we want to make sure the content fits for the height in particular. So in this case, we need this to make it work. So we're going to start off doing our title, which is friend suggestions, all caps. We're going to give this a font family of DM serif display, like so. All right, and from here, we're going to create a box like so, and we're going to create a section with profiles.map, and we will cycle through our profiles here, and we're going to grab the index as well. All right, and we're going to pass in the box, and anytime we are in this kind of setup over here, it doesn't automatically add the closing tag here. that's fine. So we're going to add a key, profile ID. We're going to give it a margin of 30 pixel and 0, display of flex, align items, center, a height of 40 pixel, and hover. Give it a color of just like 80, 80, 80. And then we're going to do a cursor of pointer when we hover. Save that. It'll auto format if you're using Prettier. And then if you go down, we're going to add an image. So now this image is going to be exactly the same as before. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the same image over here. The only difference is this is going to be profile that we're passing in. The only issue with this is that the thing we're passing in is a little bit different. The structure of it is a little bit different. So instead of it being post.profile, what we're doing is we're actually passing profile instead for the friend recommendations. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to just make this profile, and we're going to change these values a little bit and change it over here as well. So if we go back to the profile image, we're going to pass in post.profile. This is so that we have a consistency and we can make sure that everything is consistent with both of them. And from there, we have just a little bit left. So we have a box. We're going to close that box. Give this a margin left of 25 pixel. And we're going to do h4 profile.name. And we're going to pass in a paragraph profile.handle, like so. And let's make sure everything works. And there we go. The width and the height seems a little messed up. Oh yeah, so these need to be changed to 40 pixel, like so. And there you go. That's pretty much everything we have. We have our posts, we have friend suggestions, we have a connect button, and let's double check if that works. So right here, I'm going to disconnect just so we can test it out. We're going to click connect. It's going to bring up this. We're going to hit next, and we're going to connect. And we're successful. Now we can hit this button, and it'll take us to MetaMask, and we can confirm. And that was it. This is how you can build a completely decentralized social media application that connects and saves information on the blockchain. It is very similar how you would build a regular social media application, but the information is going to be saved on the blockchain, which is publicly available and owned by the public and whoever is putting the data in there. So no particular company has private access to your information. This allows users to be free from having their data be stored privately, but kept in an accessible form for all users without needing sensitive information. I hope you enjoyed this content. I may include a longer form of this decentralized social media application in the future, so don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you next time.